and welcome to the Annie Altman Show, the podcast, Season 4. Welcome to Podcastukkah, Episode 5. The Annie Altman Show projects are Field Me Search for the Humanity, an interactive stand-up comedy musical philosophy show from the perspective of a human named Annie. Hey, it's me. The Humanity is about how no one ever fully figures out how to human, how there's 10 C themes of the human experience connected by the C theme of connection, and how openly discussing these themes is part of maximizing resource equity and minimizing human suffering. Today, I am lucky to be joined by Whitney Catalano. She is the founder and the head, the person behind Trust Your Body Project. I'm so lucky to get her as a return guest on the podcast and Podcastukkah's first return guest. I'm lucky to have gotten to work with her about anti-diet and talking about diet culture. And we're going to be talking about how it's okay not to know. Thank you so much, Whitney, for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Food ends up being so relevant to embracing unknowns, and you were the first person to reflect back to me so clearly how much controlling food and body image is related to fear of death and fear of really living our life.
Right.
And I really admire and I appreciate how you bring that into conversations around diet culture and reminding people that it is more than skin deep.
It definitely is. I'm glad that I was able to facilitate that or whatever, mirror that back to you. Yeah, it's a huge thing. And, it's not like we talked about from the beginning. It's not ever about the food, it's so much more than that.
Yeah, it's such the classic, it's never about the thing, really applies to food and body image. And the other side of that, in my experience, being that food and body image are still relevant. The extremist in me definitely wanted to come out and act like it wasn't about that at all, and that also felt extreme.
Yeah, I mean, that tends to happen though, right? When you spend a lot of time dieting or whatever, trying to manipulate your body or control your body in some certain way, and then you discover the anti-diet movement. This happens to literally everyone. And then the pendulum swings in the opposite direction. You're like, fuck the beauty industry, fuck everything. I'm just gonna be this existence that floats, and I'm just never gonna care about my body again and all this stuff. And fuck the patriarchy, let's take them all down. But then you're like, okay, wait, there's something in the middle. And it doesn't need to be that rebellious,
Totally.
but it feels good.
Yeah. And following what feels good as a way to potentially make choices about when am I caring too much about sort of upholding either of those, acting like I care 100% about how I look or acting like I care 0%, neither of which are true.
Right.
Yeah, it's the how to keep making choices despite all of the unknowns that I feel like you're saying is kind of the classic pattern where part of it is you go to one pendulum and then you go to the other pendulum and then you remember that there was that space in between.
Yeah. And I think, what's interesting too is that when you care so much about what people think for so long, and then you discover the activism, the fat activism and the health at every size movement and the anti-diet movement and all that stuff, then you really care about wanting to do right by that movement as well. And it feels like some sort of betrayal if you're if you give a shit about the way that you look, or if you, whatever. And I've talked to a lot of people like that. They find the movement and they get really excited and really into it, and then it's well, what happens on days when I do want to lose weight, or what happens on days when I do want this? Does that make me a bad person? Does that mean I'm a traitor? Does that mean I'm oppressive? All this stuff. And it's no, we're all just figuring this out, and we all don't know what's going on. And the people who are the loudest are in either side, right? Are really dictating the rest. And it's really uncomfortable to maybe question that you fall somewhere in the middle, because we need those extreme voices. We need voices on the polar ends, on both sides of any conversation. And not even that we need it, like there's no avoiding it. Like there will always be an extreme of either. Like there's always a polarity of everything has a polarity, like literally everything in the world. So recognizing that like you're allowed to fit somewhere in the middle, and you're allowed to like have experiences that flow like on that spectrum somewhere, and that are not all one side or all the other. And just because these are like the particular voices that you're hearing or whatever, doesn't mean that that is necessarily like what you need to abide by in your life. Like you're not going to disappoint anyone if you care about your appearance one day, you know?
Wow, so many good points in there. And that same feeling comes up in feminism or things of, oh, am I betraying this cause by doing this thing? And I wonder, why do you think it is that it can feel more comforting maybe to pretend like you're on one of the extremes, like that part you're saying about it being okay to be in the middle, to not know, to not be on the extreme? Where does that resistance come from? From like, why do we as humans, why do you, why seek out the extremes?
I think because we all are so, I mean, one, I think we all want to fit in somewhere, right? So it's like when you leave diet culture, you feel so alienated and so just like, there's no one in my life who gets it and all this stuff. And so you're looking for community, and you do have to go extreme to unlearn all of that stuff. Like you just have to. And it is a little bit of an indoctrination period. Like I talk about diet culture being indoctrinating all the time. And yet when you start healing your relationship with food, or healing your relationship with your body, or even just questioning like, more than just food, like in the context of privilege or in the context of feminism or whatever, like when you start to learn about this stuff, you almost have to indoctrinate yourself in the extremes in order to counteract the lifetime of messages that you've had on the other side of it. Because the way that our culture is set up, like diet culture specifically, but even with, oppression and stuff, like it was extreme for so long, and we were living in extremes. And now we're kind of living in this really gray area where things like racism and sexism and homophobia are a little more like nuanced. Like they're a little more like under wraps. I hear my friends who are Black or people of color all the time talk about how, like, at least when they go to the South, like they know what kind of racism they're getting. When they come to LA, it's like a guessing game. It's like, well, what kind of racism am I going to experience today? Because everyone's so covert about it, and everyone's trying to, like, it's all kind of hush hush. And so I think we gravitate towards extremes to like find a place to fit in. And also because when you see these extreme voices talking about certain things, you can't help but be like, okay, well, there's obviously people rallied behind them. And so that must be right. And we're doing this because if you become aware of social justice of any conversation, you become aware of the harm you may have perpetuated. And that sucks. It's really shameful. It's really guilt inducing. Like it sucks to be like, yeah, I was definitely part of a system and like contributed to a system that harmed people. That is horrible. Right. And so you're trying to like almost make amends for that by going to this other extreme and being like, well, if I do anything in the middle, then I'm perpetuating harm, and I'm somehow inadvertently harming someone. And so I have to listen to these very extreme voices that are saying like, all of this stuff about it, when in reality, like that's not how human beings are. Like we exist somewhere in the middle.
We do. There's only going to be one person on the extreme of both extremes. I really appreciate you bringing up that is part of the whole spectrum, and also that then statistically most people aren't going to be there.
I also
Those,
think that most people. What?
I was going to say those voices can be so persuasive sometimes. Like my head went to persuasive fruitarian voices when I went in on veganism and raw veganism and fruitarianism, and being like drawn to that extreme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know what? I think I believe, at least, that most of the people who live in the extremes of talking about this stuff, and like, let's take fat politics, for example, right? Like, most of the people who are talking and living in the extremes, I would argue, are not necessarily living in the extremes as much as they are theorizing about the extremes.
Mm.
So their voices are really persuasive because they're academics and they're well read and they're obsessed with learning about it, which is freaking awesome, right? Like, so cool and so much power. But it's like, you take someone like Naomi Wolf, for example, in The Beauty Myth. She's been writing about feminism and the intersection of like weight loss and feminism and just all of this stuff for a while. And she has a very extreme perspective that like everything is about the patriarchy and all this stuff. And we do have evidence that like some of her theories around beauty and the patriarchy are not necessarily like, we don't see that in some other cultures around the world. And that's just more of like me, like my, it's like an academic musing sort of thing of like, well, this anthropological study, but it's like, we do have some evidence that maybe it's not like that. And I don't know if I don't know much about Naomi Wolf as a human being. I really only know about her theories and the things that she's talked about in her quotes and all this stuff. And so I always wonder, like, who are you in real life? Because I feel like even she exists somewhere in the middle of all of this.
Wow. Yes, that distinction between someone's work and their existence as a human and what they put out there and what they're actually doing in their
And
life.
living and believing. Yeah.
Yeah, and you acknowledged a lot of things, two things especially I want to underscore with the great noise timing of the first being that the need for that exploration and the benefits for humans as a whole to have people who are passionate and interested about different things and willing to take things far and really go into it and put that out there. And the other thing you brought up that I want to underscore is the gentleness. That was how it felt to me. I actually got kind of goosebumpy about the necessity, both individually and collectively, for the other extreme to be there, or for that other extreme to be experienced in order, not even in order, just that it happens. That's just what happens.
Right. And in order, right? There's this theory, I forget what it's called, but it's this theory of, and maybe I even talked about it to you before, but I don't remember. So it's this theory of like, it's a political theory, and it's about how, actual politics exists somewhere in a middle line, right? Like, if you look at everything as a spectrum, and it's almost like a bell curve, so actual politics experience or are happening somewhere in the middle of that bell curve, and then you've got the extremists on either side of the arguments. And one of the things that we see happen is that the more extreme, like, it can feel like as our culture is getting more sort of left leaning and more sort of politically correct or whatever, and there's all these conversations happening that maybe weren't before on such a wide scale because of oppression and all that stuff, right? Like, because of everything.
All that classics.
Yeah, now all of a sudden we're seeing all of these really extremist voices pop up on the right and pop up are very, oppressive and like giving voice to this extreme, and people get worried about that. But then actually, when you break down, I wish I had the specifics of this theory, but basically what it says is like, one of the things that is happening is that actually we are moving in a more accepting and progressive, regardless of actual Republican or Democratic, I'm talking more sort of like social theory. We are moving in a more like progressive direction on average. We're moving that middle needle point closer to the more like progressive, inclusive, accepting, intersectional direction. Is it taking forever? Yeah, of course it's taking forever, because when the needle starts to move that way, the people on the opposite end freak out, get louder, get more angry, get more oppressive, get more like, no, like, don't take our power, But ultimately, we're like, it's like, if you think of just that middle point on the spectrum, it's making tiny, tiny incremental change, like movements in the progressive, inclusive direction. And we need the extreme voices leading that, because most people do fall in the center.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought up the bell curve, because that is the graph I talk about on this podcast and in the One Woman Show. The podcast is connected to, and the kind of, I mean, the it's the Libra symbol also, or it's like a very similar shape to that,
Mm-hmm.
of balance, and how, I guess, kind of the all of the things, to be as general as possible, all of the things end up balancing themselves out, as you're saying. And I'm curious if that means too that then, as those voices out on the extremes of the bell curve get louder or go out even farther, that then that puts even more people closer to the center, towards that being okay with not knowing sort of a space where there's more room for gray, for the nuance, for all of these things about, oh, I have this and these feelings about food in my body, or any sort of social, anything. That was very
I would
broad.
assume so. Yeah, I get what you're saying though. I would assume so because people are going to exist there regardless. And I think what it does when voices move in that direction away from like the old systems into this new way of thinking and new way of approaching conversations, you've got the people who are like, so let's take for example the people who are say things like your generation's so like politically correct, like everyone's so sensitive, like those people, right? A lot
Mhm.
of those people are progressive in other ways, and it's just been a lot of change really quickly. Like with the internet, we've gone from like small incremental social justice changes that happen that are like really, all the social justice and like the civil rights and stuff, like those things that were happening before really before the age of the internet. Those things were happening on it was so extreme, as such isolated situations, all this stuff. And now these conversations are happening every second of the day across the globe. It's so different. It is so, so different the way that we're having these conversations. And so even the people who you're like, come on, can't you just get on board? Like, it's really not that hard to, like, if someone says they're non-binary, to call them they. Like, it's not that hard. We have to realize that the people who feel like they're resistant and they're like on the other side or whatever, not getting it, are actually so much more in the middle than they would have been before. And what's happening is that the middle is being redefined, and we're like pulling them along with us. Like, let's fucking go. You got to get on board. Like, let's do this. And it's slowly redefining. And I think when more people exist in the middle, more people the same amount of people arguably always exist in the middle. But when this middle is being redefining, then you've got all these people who have to figure out, like, how does this fit in with my values? How does this fit in a way? Like, how do I make sense of this in a way that doesn't feel like, just cognitive dissonance? And I think also what happens too is like, once you start learning about activism and social justice and things like that, like you can't help but start to feel cognitive dissonance in the way that you're not participating.
Totally. Like you brought up before about realizing that that you have caused direct harm, that you contributed to systems that cause direct harm, and
Mm-hmm.
seeing the not being able to unsee something once you've seen it. That's such a
Mm-hmm.
good point too, and so relevant about the internet connecting and also speeding along different sorts of social justice, civil rights movements in new ways, and being a totally new type of tool to connect people and to do that with, and also to remind people that of having these nuanced conversations, and that there's other people having these conversations, and that there are more people in the middle than maybe we can think sometimes, or feel like we're isolated in our beliefs, and having so much out there being talked about all the time then reminds us, wait a minute, there's other people who are having the same sort of cognitive dissonance as well, and asking themselves these same questions, and sitting with what it's like not to know something and to know other things, and how to put those together.
Yeah.
Which even actually feels like
Yeah.
the base of a lot of civil rights movements, is being like, okay, what we know is there's a problem here. What we know is there's something unjust. And what we don't know is exactly the steps to change, to making choices towards equity, and then figuring that out by doing it and messing up, or whatever that process is that is not going to be as linear as the extremist control-y part of me, at least, is like, why isn't there a step-by-step plan?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think questioning any sort of system that's in place involves a lot of unknown because and that's what makes it so scary and so intimidating is that like there isn't any clear plan and also you're going against literally everything that everyone believes and so you're like, okay, well, how am I supposed like let's take a community because I don't necessarily want to like speak on like the civil rights because I don't know much about it other than what I learned from like white textbooks, right? It was just fucked up. Like I should learn more about that. But like you can see the parallels in like a lot of these different things, which is for example, in diet culture, like I have so much respect for the original fat activists. Like I have so much respect for like the people who have been talking about fat activism and the fact that you can like be fired for being fat or like all of this stuff since like the 60s. Like this is not a new movement. And I think it's so funny when people are like, oh my gosh, like you're pioneering this movement or something like people say that to me. And I'm just like, no, you don't get it. Like I'm really not. I'm just thin and loud. Like like I'm just really loud. Like and you know what? And my privilege like makes it seem radical.
Yes, and you
Mhm.
are you are part of you are one of the pioneers of this movement on the internet to connect it with the internet as a new tool that the original fat activists in the 60s didn't have then. And then in some ways that also makes it even more for me of a wow that people were still doing so much in so many different ways with whatever tools they had. And
No,
with so
yeah,
much,
like in the 60s. Sorry, go ahead.
I just said, with so much resistance.
Yeah. No, like in the 60s, if you wanted to start like a 70, I forget when it was like fat activism first started being like this is the earliest I know of it. And I may read, there's Christy Harrison has a book coming out on like the history of diet culture, which will be really interesting for me to read because I'm sure there's a lot I don't know. But like back in like the 60s and 70s, if you wanted to like talk about fat activism for a second, like you had to like start an organization to do that, you had to go like outside, you had to leave your fucking house. Like I don't have to leave my house to do it. It's crazy. Like, I don't know. If I had to leave my house to be an activist, like I genuinely don't know if I would. I mean, granted, I've went to marches, I've gone to rallies, I've gone to like a, Black Lives Matter march, and I've gone to obviously the women's marches and things like that. And so it's like, but that's what, how many times a year, It's like I
It's really
don't
different.
have to leave my house that much to do it. So it's just it's honestly amazing. And I know that our generation is just continuing this fight that's been happening for so long and making it more nuanced. And like, I'm just trying to over here be the best ally I can with the like, time and space and energy that I have, right? Like there's only so much reading and so much like learning I can do before I'm absolutely burned out. And it's just, it can some days feel a little bit like a minefield because you're like, I have no idea if what I'm about to say, what I'm about to step into is going to blow up in my face. But if it does, like you just get over your ego and learn from it.
Yes. I wonder for me at least, that it feels a very, very much my ego that comes up and says it's not okay for me to not know something, or to say that,
Right.
because logically I know that there's always going to be unknowns in the same way, you can know that logically you're never going to read, view, consume every piece of literature on all of that activism and diet culture just numerically in the day. And so how to
Yeah.
be okay with that. It's like we have the internet and all this information, all this stuff is out there and accessible. And also we still have finite time and energy in terms of what we can consume and process and not burn ourselves out from.
And I would argue that actually, now that we have so much information available, we actually have less energy and less attention and less ability to absorb information because we're spending so much time taking in information that we're not even like using or planning on doing anything with, right?
Totally. It's like the bell curve going to the other extreme of too much information, or just like having so much information that then we need to spend energy sifting through it before
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's like,
You go.
yeah. I was just going to say, like, it's so interesting to me to like, I have literally the most books that I want to read about certain things, right? Like, there's so many freaking books that have come out, even just this year, that I'm like trying to get through. And every time I sit down to read an educational book about something that I'm actually genuinely interested in, I'm so burned out from like checking social media that I cannot focus on a page. I'm just like, ugh, let me now like just watch something mindless because I just can't. And that's crazy. Like, that is so wild.
Yeah. Well, also, I would guess that a lot of what you're looking at on social media is related to that same topic. So I could see very much
Exactly.
how you're like, I need a fucking break from this. Like, I can't give that much focus to that one topic all of the time.
Yeah. Yo, can I tell you about something that I like have just like literally this week decided I'm really passionate about and have is a total unknown minefield?
Yes. Fuck.
And feels terrifying. You're like, please. Okay, so I'm like really involved in like the entrepreneur world and the whatever. And I've always had a problem with like, you know how in the entrepreneur world it's like find your tribe and like all this stuff. Like I've always had a problem with that language because I'm like, we're not native. Like stop using the word tribe. Like it's not a tribe. Like you can just say community. Like it's not that hard. You know? It's just like tribe is catchy. And so there's like I've had certain problems with the entrepreneur world, like the boss babe world. I'm just like, we get it. And like, you know, the goddesses, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, like be whiter, you know? And these communities are like freaking white, like a crap ton of people who look like me. And it's always just been a thing where it's kind of like diet culture. Like I actually, but I think it's better than diet culture, and I see a lot of parallels. I think it's better than diet culture in the sense that I think that entrepreneurs actually like have the ability to completely change the world. I think entrepreneurs are the future of the world, for sure, because like trying to get anything done on a freaking, you know, government or like state, you know, it's just trying to get anything done is just a nightmare and a half. And I think entrepreneurs are the reason why so much of this, like we wouldn't have the internet without entrepreneurs. You know what I mean? Like this is entrepreneurs are literally going to save the planet, I'm convinced. And why are these communities so white and so privileged and not talking about it? And one of the things I realized, so manifestation is something like a big thing that's practiced in the entrepreneur world. And it's like, you know, tap into your gratitude and like say what you want and then watch it come true. And the way that manifestation has always been written about in history is, from what I know, I haven't read much about it, to be honest. This is just what I've heard because, and I think it's also like kind of a blessing in disguise that I haven't read much about it because I'm not indoctrinated in it really.
Yeah.
But from what I know about it, the way that it's been talked about in the world is like white people being like, I wished for this thing to come true and it did. Oh my God. And like it changed my life and I'm freaking awesome and like all this stuff. And if you're not awesome or living a life that you want, it's because you're not trying hard enough.
You're not being grateful, or you're not letting go enough, or you're not
Or
aligning your
you have limiting beliefs. Limiting beliefs are such a thing, right?
Totally.
And it's like no one is taking the second to be like, yeah, you probably, because I actually do believe in that to an extent, right? I have seen the power in my own life of questioning my limiting beliefs. I do it all the time. It's something I'm constantly reassessing. And I also believe in using manifestation as a tool of just like producing really high energy, high vibe to attract things in your life that you might not have attracted in a very low vibe, like hiding, like very kind of reserved energy, right? And I believe all of this stuff. And I think that the one thing we're not talking about is the fact that like you can't even begin to start talking about manifestation if you're just trying to feed your family.
Yeah.
If you're living in poverty. Right? Like it's just not, it's not a thing. Like
Maslow's hierarchy.
and In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, exactly. And so there's this guy, Mastin Kipp, who I've been following recently, and I met at a conference. And basically, what he talks about is he's like, he's very well educated on the trauma response, like the physiological, what's happening in the body in response to trauma. Why do we hide? Why do we shut down? Why do we, whatever? And how can you acknowledge those instincts to hide and shut down as a learned trauma response and work on healing that response and shifting out of it moment to moment so that you can do things like manifest, or you can do things like put your energy out there or take big risks or dream bigger and question your beliefs.
Bringing so many fields there.
Exactly. And the connection that I made with this was like, okay, how hard is it? Like, of course, all these white people are running around being like, I manifested the world. You don't have the weight of like being stigmatized and oppressed holding you back. And you live in a world where you're more likely to be successful.
Yes. Yeah. I'm so glad that you brought this up, despite feeling like, oh, maybe a minefield of unknowns or any of these things because I am right there with you about seeing both sides and being unclear and telling myself it's okay not to know. And then what do I do? How do I take action on acknowledging the power of thought and belief, and also acknowledging historical context and day-to-day life context, and embracing reality of the situations that people are in and have been in. And epigenetics is coming up in my head here as a way is these gaps too, of saying there's even more nuance than we believe, which really also could be that there's more connection than we anticipated with things. And the truth that I come to is that not talking about things hasn't worked.
Right.
And I'm not sure about exactly how to talk about them. What I know is that not talking about it doesn't work. So in those communities of super white entrepreneurs, them being there to me is less of, quote, the problem than them not acknowledging how they're there, what they can do to make those spaces actually reflect the population of humans more. And like, to me, to go to the topic of knowns and unknowns, part of what like truly just confuses me in these situations is that logically we get to know more the more variety of perspectives we encounter and bring on and listen to. We see more of a whole bell curve by, like you were saying, about the importance of the people at the extremes and meeting everyone on the curve. And so in different communities, it's like, it's this part of me that's like, I don't compute people getting in. It's like, I want to almost like not even shake people. It's like, I'm just like truly dumbfounded about you're getting in your own way and holding yourself back from knowing more by excluding people. Like, there's only ways this is creating more harm. And then to say the parts of the unknowns, it's, well, okay, what does actually including people really look like? How do we bring people into different communities? How do we actually open these spaces up in reality?
Yeah. And what was interesting is that, so I started talking about manifestation in this context, right? Of like just casually on my Instagram story this week. I was just like, I think, because I want to start like a very small, intimate support group in January. That's like an 8-week manifestation support group. It's something that I'm really passionate about. It's something I just like, I want to create a vibe and an energy for myself because I don't have that right now. I do a lot of one-on-one work. I do a lot of group coaching. And it's like, as healing and beautiful as it is, it also is like heavy. It's really heavy for me. And so I wanted to create some sort of like support group that was based in manifestation, but it was like from a socially, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about this because I've been in so much like manifestation conversations and whatever. And like, I see it working when we do it. Like I see people of, you know, all different like ethnicities, races, like body types, all this stuff, like doing this and really experiencing like some beauty in their life because of it. And I've been having these conversations, and finally I figured out like the piece that's missing is really like, this isn't a tool to like blame someone if they don't have the life. And we need to be talking about like the systems that are not within our control. Like this is about making the best of what is within your control. And so I was like talking about this stuff on Instagram, and I got a lot of pushback. Like there were a few people who were like, yes, this is awesome. This is exactly what I've been like grappling with. Like it's something didn't sit right with me about it. Like all this stuff, like you only ever see like thin white women talking about manifestation. Like, why is that? Da, da, da. And so, but then I got some people being like, no, like look at the problematic history. And I even got one person being like, you just should not talk about this. Like, do not talk about it. Do not like, please do not do this program. Like as if it's like offensive to her that I would even consider it. And she was like, it just doesn't sit right with me that, you know, there are people who are being like at the border being like ripped away from their families. And you're just saying that like, it's because they didn't manifest hard enough. And I was like, first of all, that's absolutely not what I'm saying. Second of all, this is like a tool, not a, you know, whatever, like it's not a me putting responsibility. And third of all, like I think maybe you just don't understand what I'm saying because like whatever, it was just like a miscommunication. But it was interesting to see this pushback because one person in particular was like, you know, you why are you so bent? Like she was like, what you're saying makes sense, but why are you so adamant about using that word manifestation? Why do you feel the need? Why do you feel tied to using that word? Why can't you just call it something else? Because what you're saying does make a lot of sense and does seem to be more inclusive than the way manifestations are usually talked about. Like, can't you just use a different word that's not so oppressive or not tied to so much oppression? And I straight up was like, no, because we need to, if I don't use that word, then we're not changing the conversation.
Ooh, like how people in all sorts of different historical contexts have reclaimed words.
Right. Like I want to go into white communities, white women, be like, gather around, my white ladies, like let's chit chat.
Yeah, I wanted to share it too. A friend of mine once said, and I quote directly, it's always white people who take spirituality too far.
Totally.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, well, you know,
Like less harm.
my mind my mind immediately went to like white people and
less harm had been created.
what?
I misspoke. That was a weird slip. It had been, I would say the joke would be a lot funnier if there had been less harm created by white people taking spirituality too far.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I guess that part of it stands part of why it's funny is because of that. It's not actually funny in the reality of, yeah.
Like we got to find humor in it because it's also, you know, like I think it's funny the idea of me going into like white spaces. What?
Yeah, I was getting excited about that reminder, that need, that the more dark and heavy something is, the more it does need the humor, the lightness, the something. Otherwise, how else are we going to get to start talking about it and to start making some choices towards movement from it?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Without acknowledging those things, then we miss the whole space for conversation about saying, cool, manifestation can exist, and so can the needs to have your basic human resources covered in order for you to sit and think and feel about what you want and need and believe. And like this podcast and philosophizing, being privileges based in historical privileges that become then layered and layered and layered, that give people different opportunities in unfair ways.
Yeah. And it's interesting because this does feel like it's something that I'm really passionate about starting to talk about more. And it does feel really important for me to talk about because, you know, I get this vibe from the entrepreneur world or like the boss babe, like goddess world, that like if you talk about systemic inequalities or if you talk about whatever, that it like brings the vibe down and you're encouraged not to talk about this stuff, which is very, very interesting to me because that's the problem, right? And
yes, people saying good vibes only, and then
right, exactly.
It doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm. And so the space isn't being created for people to genuinely struggle with the type of like oppression and stigma and quote limiting beliefs that have been put onto them by the world, like forced down their throats. And so
Yeah.
that's why these communities are so exclusive and so harmful, or can be more harmful and can be very much like off-putting and stuff. And so I just thought it was interesting because, you know, there's something really terrifying about starting to talk about this, because in the same way that talking about diet culture is really terrifying, of like, I'm potentially going to alienate the very community that I'm in.
Mm.
There's also something really necessary that feels like my heart is like, do it. Shake it up.
Yeah. Yeah. And to tie it to what you're saying about entrepreneurs, because you're the one doing the program, you have a lot of autonomy about that program. It's like all of the different ways now people do programs and do the first thing that's coming to mind is people who do different sliding scale payments for all sorts of different entrepreneurial pursuits that they manage through the internet. And that is just one way to make things more accessible to a larger variety of people, and then change those conversations and change what those communities look like and what their norms are.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing too that just like keeps coming up in my head is like, let's go white women, like fucking manifest equity in the world. Let's manifest food being distributed to everyone. Then if that like, if you're, you know, if you're going to refuse, which I also disagree with doing, or agree with you saying that that is really the root of the problem that is creating more problems here, to not talk about the whole spectrum of things. If you're only going to talk about the positive, then let's manifest equity. Let's manifest situations for everyone to be able to manifest.
Right. And something that I see a lot amongst, and this isn't happening all the time, but something that I see a lot amongst entrepreneurs is they start to make a ton of money, and it's all about impact, and it's all about all the stuff, which I genuinely think is coming from a good place. And I also genuinely think that the impact that these entrepreneurs are making is like awesome. It's freaking awesome. And I love it. And there needs to be a little more like social consciousness around it. And they're then investing in charities or giving back to charities, right? Like the more money you make, this is a general theme that's talked about in the entrepreneur world. Is like the more money you make, the more you can give back, the more you can help others, the more you can, like, it is very, it's really cool actually to see these conversations happening. But then what I notice is that a lot of the places that these big, really powerful entrepreneurs are giving back are like, let's go, you know, give clean water in Africa. Let's go like do this thing in Africa. Okay, that's it. We did it. You know, like they'll continue to do it. And like, I know, you know, building schools in Africa, clean water, all this stuff. But I'm like, what about America? Like,
What
why
about the
can't we,
people
you know, like,
mile radius of you who are sleeping outside?
right. Why does it have to be? And that's not to say that all entrepreneurs are by any means. I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs that then turn around and do a lot of good in America as well. And I think that both need to exist, right? We can't have just one or the other. Like it's not, it's, you know, but why? It's just so interesting that you can have these, it's like have your success, give back, do all these things, but don't talk about systemic inequalities, because that might mean that you have to give up some of your privilege.
Ooh, I do believe that I both scientifically, spiritually, that is why people don't talk about it more, is their fear
100%.
of losing their position. And like you brought up too about that human wanting to know where we fit in on the spectrum of things, and then it feeling scary and unsettling to say, wait, maybe I don't know. What do I do if I give money or give time to this place or that place, or back some sort of organization that's just starting out and isn't already established and indoctrinated into X, Y, or Z system, and supporting them in some new way. And then the internet comes up here too, because there's both the internet as a tool for accountability and a way to hold people accountable for their actions, and then there's also part of the internet backlash and internet trolls and all of those things that can make people, I feel, also insecure to potentially face that sort of resistance or commentary back so publicly. It's vulnerable to put yourself out there publicly. And then the flip side of that is that then, it's like having read receipts or not read, like receipts of text or emails or whatever, that it then also serves as a record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Gives us a historical see what's happening.
Yeah, it's scary. I think one of the most powerful things that like Brene Brown, for example, has said is she, in her like Netflix special, she said that the people who are like criticizing you or calling you out are likely not the people who are in the ring doing it themselves.
Yep.
And so any day, if I was approached by someone who is, in the activism space of any kind and was like, hey, Whitney, this thing that you said, I have some problems with it. I'd love to just like have a conversation with you about it. And, whatever. Hell yeah, let's go. Let's talk about it. Cause like, I want to know if I'm doing something, if I'm inadvertently like creating harm. I want to know if I'm unknowingly doing something that everyone is sitting around being like, oh no, you missed the mark. Like, I want to know because I'm learning, right? I don't know. And I won't know unless someone tells me. But at the same time, that also means like on that kind of scale, you're subjecting yourself to the opinions of all these people that just are like, whew, noise, So it's challenging. It's scary. It's scary to mess up. It's scary to alienate. And it is unknown. You don't know how it's going to work out. You don't know what's going to come of it if you talk about really anything that is a little bit off the, mainstream.
Yeah. Yeah. And then much like filtering through all the information on the internet, generally it's filtering through what sort of feedback you get and what you take to heart more or less. And I do the same thing in my, like in real life of looking at the context that person is coming from in whatever they're sharing. And also really viewing it as a gift. To me, any sort of communication is a gift because people can always choose to not communicate. And so it's someone offering one of their knowns, which may or may not be relevant, resonate with me, which I may or may not be able to receive at that moment in a way that I would want to fully receive it. It's still someone saying, hey, other human, I have this piece of information. Here you go. Yeah. That's a literal gift of information. Like you were saying of like if you're doing something that everyone else is being like, ooh, that's kind of cringy. Ooh, I don't get that. Or that could, I do feel like it's like the line of conspiracy theories to ignorance and human lack of organization and giving space to say maybe people just literally don't know.
Right.
And then at the same time, we're putting in reality to say, well, how do we make spaces to give people more opportunities to know things and to make it easier for people to learn and reflect and all of these things at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah, there's this like thing that people always say when you become like a quote expert in a topic. It's like, and it's funny because it's actually been studied of like new, like beginners in a topic feel like they know everything. Like their confidence and what they perceive to know is like through the roof. And then there's something happens in the middle of like probably what would be represented as the majority of your career in this one topic, where your confidence just takes a nosedive. You are arguably learning much more than you ever did at the beginning. And you know way more than you ever did at the beginning, but your perceived knowledge is like through the floor. It's just when they were testing this stuff, it literally was like the opposite of a bell curve. Like the upside down bell curve. And
yeah, I know everything.
When they nothing. I know nothing for most of my career. And then when someone reaches what's considered like the actual expert level, then all of a sudden their confidence is back up and they're like, yeah, I'm an expert. It's taken me 20 years, but I'm here.
That's so interesting. It's like a constant pendulum swing of I'm an expert, I know nothing. I'm an expert, I know nothing.
It's
Like,
not constant though. That's the weird thing.
so you hit one wall and then the other and then the middle.
It's basically just like at the beginning, probably because you're trying to just delude yourself into starting a business or taking risks or whatever. So you have to almost convince yourself that you know a lot, even when you don't know shit, because otherwise you'd never start, right? You'd never start doing anything. I would never have started a business if I knew how little I knew, you know?
Yeah, that's well said. You have to
Yeah.
feel some self-confidence to make choices and make moves and do things.
Or fake self-confidence to make choices. And then you start to learn stuff. You get good at your job. You start to learn more. And the more you learn, the more you realize you cannot learn everything. It's physically impossible. And so then you just enter this middle ground of like, I'm not that confident. I really don't know everything. I don't even kind of know like a 10% of everything. I feel like that's Dax Shepard. Do you ever listen to Armchair Expert?
Yeah, he's fun. I haven't listened to a
He
ton.
always
Like,
says that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he always says it. He always is like, "Oh, I know nothing," like da 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 da. But he's very wise. Like for, a white male who's super rich, like he's very wise and like he's very open to being wrong, which I think is probably his best quality is like even though he is very stubborn, he also like does learn and does change his perspective and is open to being wrong. And so he talks about it all the time of like he knows nothing, like da 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 da. But I think it's interesting because I think he's going to look back and be like, oh, wow, like I knew a lot. I just had absolutely zero confidence. But here we are. I started the podcast and like now 20 years later, like this is what's going on. So, we find out really quickly how little we know and how little we're always going to know because there's just no way of knowing it all or even knowing maybe 5% of it all.
No. And as we keep learning more things, part of what that shows us is how much more there is to learn, therefore how little we know. Relatively, we know nothing.
Exactly. And so then you're just kind of spending decades sitting in this discomfort of like, I don't know shit, but people think I do. And I have a business about not knowing shit. So, well, all right. Okay.
To full circle it, I feel like, at least in my experience, and with some people I've talked to about this, that it's so tied to the control thing that so many people will say that I'll say for myself for sure of grappling with what control even means and wanting that fake confidence of knowing things as a means of control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then being able to the freedom that gives of saying that you don't know something, to let yourself be wrong, let yourself learn something new, let someone gift you feedback.
Mm-hmm. Because, like you were saying, it really is a gift. And it's also okay to admit that, like, we don't know shit, because no one does. And that's what I'm realizing. Like, the more people I talk to, the more I'm like, oh my God, no one knows what's going on.
Yeah, no one knows how to be a human. We're all improv all the time.
I like genuinely thought that like there would be some sort of indoctrination into like adulting,
Yeah, like a
I
moment
genuinely thought that. And I work with so many like women in particular in their 40s and 50s who don't know what the hell's going on and got really screwed up by their parents or are screwing up their kids. And it just gave me so much appreciation for like, yeah, parents are people. And they don't know what the heck is going on. They're doing their best. They're messy. They're like, whatever. Like, we all don't. And there's something weirdly comforting about that because it's like you compare yourself inadvertently to all these people who you think are these experts, right? Like, this kind of comes full circle. It's like comparing yourself to these experts on the extreme and these activists and the people who are so well read and well researched and like da 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 da. And yet, if you talk to them, they don't know what the hell's going on either.
No one has any idea ever. It is a beautiful connection. We all don't know together.
Yeah, we're all just doing our best, and we give some people's voices way more power than other people's voices. And I think there's a good and a bad to that, Like, I think it's really beautiful, and I think it's really harmful.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's shifting towards, okay, well, we know that that's not sustainable to only give voices to an inaccurate reflection of the population. And then we also don't know, we know that is not sustainable, that that's not ethical. And then we don't know exactly how to shift that. And also we know that it is shifting and we are moving towards more equity, and we're here observing it, watching it manifest.
Honestly, I think so. Yeah, I think so. And I think, just to kind of bring it back to manifest, because you just said that, I think that more people manifest more things in their life than they realize.
Like don't want to accept responsibility for how things happened, or just like they feel like they're more separate from their life, or what do you mean?
I think that people think that like people who are not thin white women in the entrepreneur world think that manifesting, or in the spiritual world, right? Think that manifesting is this thing that's like, you know, it's this thing that has to be like only in like a goddess circle around like a bunch of crystals, and you have to like, you know, create this energy vortex and like da da da, like that you have to like be doing this with some sort of shaman. And it's not even like that. Like, I think that people, there's things that happen, for example, that you believe to be true. Like, I'm gonna graduate high school. Let's go to the very basic level. And if someone believes genuinely that they're going to graduate high school and then continues to take action to graduate high school, they're going to graduate high school. And I think that's like the most rudimentary form of manifestation ever, but it's so normalized that we just don't even think about it.
Yes, the placebo effect is coming up so much as relevant here, and collectively talking about and acknowledging that more, that our beliefs impact the choices that we make.
Well,
So
and
something
that's the whole premise of
gradual.
manifestation. Yeah. Because it's not about, I'm going to be successful and then not do shit about it and just like pray every day that I'm going to be successful and then wake up one day and you're successful. Like, that's just not how this works. Manifestation is really about questioning the beliefs that are getting in the way of like what you think is possible, and even questioning like at the base of it like what you actually think is possible, because we don't know. It's the whole thing, right? Like, we don't know what's possible. Anything could be possible,
Anything could be possible. Yes. Yeah.
but we're
And
so limited by what the damaged adults in our life have told us is possible.
yes, and now the internet and entrepreneurs and all of these things are bringing together this sort of heady or woo woo or any sort of essentially word for an intangible experience into tangible things, and just
Mhm.
flipping everything on its head about, the more things that come out and the more things that happen in reality, then the more evidence and support and help that gives for other people in their internal experiences of saying, oh, look, that person did it, I can too. Oh, look, this organization got started that gets food, tampons, whatever basic needs to people. They did that, so I could do that too, or I could be involved in that too, or maybe this other thing is possible too because I'm seeing that happened.
Mhm.
And then it feels like, well, it feels like both. It feels like in some ways it's exponentiating, and in some ways it's like, why isn't this happening yet? Like, why isn't there, how are there still people who don't have things that they need to be human?
Mhm.
Dang, I'm glad you brought up manifestation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been something on my mind.
It is on our minds all the time, whether or not we are aware.
We realize it. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, our thoughts about the situation, our feelings about the situation. That's
Yeah.
at a bare minimum impacting what we're thinking and feeling.
Yeah. And I don't think
Yeah.
it has anything to do with whether or not you're surviving, right? I think that manifestation's on a different plane than survival.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's connected to a point in everything being connected. And I agree that they're separate topics or there's definitely
Yeah,
separation
they
there.
intersect somewhere for sure. I don't know where yet.
I don't either. I don't either.
Because they've got to, right? Like it's just not like, I think that they exist on a different plane, and you see people like every freaking, story of a kid who grew up in poverty and like against all odds like did this thing or like whatever. Like every like movie that we've seen about that is partially a story about survival and partially a story about manifestation, whether or not you want to call it that.
Hmm.
And I don't know how much of those stories are fabricated. I don't know how much, I don't know much, right? Like, again, don't know. But what I do know is that, like, there's something here that I think is just not being talked about in the way that, like, white people have talked about it up until this point. And I'm very curious to dive more into it. Like, that's like my new passion thing right now. It's just like, what the heck is going on around here? Like,
Excavating,
who can I talk to
exploring.
about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
like, who's in charge here? Everyone's like, no one. I'm like, shit. All right.
Oh yeah, to bring it back to the other like really white women trope in here a lot of like, can I speak to your manager? It's like maybe there isn't a
I
manager of this
know.
person.
There
We
really
all
isn't.
together. And
Yeah.
remind each other
So,
that it's okay not to have it all figured out immediately and to not know all the pieces. Because we would be bored if that was the case. If everything manifested immediately and we knew everything immediately.
yeah.
I'm not convinced that's actually what people want. I do
Yeah.
want
I also,
I feel strongly about that one.
yeah. And I think there's something too about recognizing that like manifestation, when we talk about it, is not like this tangible thing of like, I manifested this laptop. And there's some people that do, my a business coach that I worked with this year, she has some pretty ridiculous stories that are like pretty damn specific evidences of manifestation. And I was like, is that manifestation? I don't know. But like that story's wild, and you do look like you float. Like she walks around this world like she doesn't walk on the planet. You know what I mean? Like she is just like a whole freaking another level of energy vibes, and I'm just like, oh my god. Being in her presence was constantly just like almost intoxicating, because you're just like, why are you so much magic? But it was interesting because what I can see, one of the phrases or quotes I've been hearing a lot is like this or something better. So it's like when you're manifesting or you're thinking about what you want in the world, it's like this or something better. Like it's so unknown that we don't even know if we can know what's best for us.
Yeah, and then trust comes in of trusting that someone, something, some situation else will know that something better is a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just
Exactly.
acknowledging what we can't know, acknowledging the part of any known that is an unknown, acknowledging the part of faith that is doubt. Like you said, everything is a polarity. At least in this,
Mm-hmm.
as we're experiencing life in this manifest form, duality
Yeah.
exists.
Well, it has to. It's physics.
Mm. Oh, I want to
Every
just like go to
force has an
the
equal and
radical.
opposite. I
What?
know. I know. I'm like, I just said that every force has an equal and opposite, because that's the I think third law. But yeah, we're kind of talking in circles at this point, but I love it.
Yeah, it is. It is all circularly connected in some unknown way. Thank you so much for coming back on and for this was I like got goosebumpy and I really appreciate you being willing to go into the unknown and share what you're currently processing.
Of course. I love our conversations always. We have good ones. So I was happy to do it.
We do. Yeah, we really do. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for the work that you're doing and it's so fun to get a watch and to keep seeing how you keep exploring your own personal and work unknowns and knowns, and it's very exciting to get to see,
Yeah.
and also just it's comforting to know that it is out there.
It is out there, thankfully. I'm not the only one, so I love it.
Thank you again for coming on, and thank you for everyone
Of course.
listening.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being you. Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end. Please check out the AnnieAltmanShow.com and also patreon.com/The Annie Altman Show if you're able and interested in donating $1 or more per month to these projects. Non-dollar ways to share value includes and is not limited to sharing anything, the podcast, any YouTube video, any blog post, any social media account, subscribing, following anywhere, rating or reviewing anything, sending any feedback or ideas, and or connecting me with people for the podcast or other projects you feel would enjoy this work. In my opinion, word of mouth is the only quote real advertising, so here I am using words from my mouth.